All right, it is our plan to finish up our study of Ruth this evening. If you didn't notice, on the back table we have new notes for our next study, which we, depending on how long it takes to get through Ruth, we may actually get to tonight, or at least begin, on Gamaliel, Nicodemus, and Joseph of Arimathea. Calling it the leaders of the Jews, or the rulers of the Jews, kind of character study, those three specifically. All right, so last week we finished Ruth chapter 3. We noticed how that Naomi following, or how Ruth, following the directions of Naomi, did as she was instructed. She laid at the feet of Boaz. He understood exactly what she was asking, to take her as his wife, so that she could have future and have a family and so forth. And of course, in doing this, Naomi will be taken care of as well. But at in verse 17 and 18, Boaz, understanding the law, recognized that there was a closer blood relative than he is. Again, we don't know the exact relation of Boaz, whether he was what we might call a second cousin to Naomi or what have you. However, there was a closer relative. And Boaz understood that per the law, that individual has the obligation or the right to do so, and not him, unless that individual chooses not to. So in verse 18, after Ruth comes back to Naomi, Naomi tells Ruth, "Sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will turn out. For the man will not rest until he has concluded the matter this day." This isn't going to be something, and again, whether this is obviously, Naomi knows Boaz and that this is going to be concluded soon. This is going to be something he's going to take care of. Whether that was also part of the custom itself, that it be resolved as soon as possible when the request is made, or if it's simply because specifically of Boaz's nature and his character, that this is something he didn't want Naomi, and for that matter Ruth, doesn't want to leave them hanging, not knowing what's happening. And so, regardless, Naomi knows that Boaz is going to take care of this issue. So, in chapter 4 and in verse 1, Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend." So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." So he came aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the close relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. And I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you." Now, this is the first we're hearing about this piece of land. Okay, now I don't know what all is involved in this discussion. If this is a piece of land that we have not heard about this piece of land before. I'm not saying that in any way Boaz is lying, but there's a process by which this is taking place. And so I don't know if this piece of land maybe that Boaz had that he gave to Naomi. I don't know. There's some custom involved in this. I know that we can observe that. But in terms of this piece of land, this is the first time we're hearing about it. But Boaz says that there is this piece of land that once belonged to Elimelech, our brother or our relative, that has fallen to Naomi. But Naomi, why can't she possess it? She's a woman. Okay? And in that time, she wasn't able to be a landowner. All right, and so she had to have a husband who would till that ground, who would make use of that land, because she couldn't do it on her own, and by law she wasn't allowed to do it. And so that had to fall to one of the closest relatives. So this relative, he says, yes, I will redeem it. Okay, so regarding the piece of land, I'll take it. Then Boaz goes on to say, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. Now, here's the interesting little second part of this. that he talks about this field, this land that Naomi owns, and then he says, when you buy it from Naomi, you have to buy it from Ruth as well. Because Ruth is the wife of the son of Elimelech and the son of Naomi. But notice what he says, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. So obviously there's more to this than just the land. What's being specifically referenced is taking Ruth as wife and bringing up children in the relative's name through Ruth. That's what's being specifically referenced here. And then in verse 6, the close relative, he says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. When it was just the land, the relative was willing. But once Boaz mentions the fact that Ruth is a part of this custom, this understanding, because Ruth is alive, this is the wife of the dead son, and so she is going to be a part of this inheritance, and you must raise up children for this dead relative. That's where the close relative says, I can't do that. Okay, now you can't take one and leave the other. It's all part and parcel together. And so as a result, the relative had to say, I can't do it. Now there's, again, I have a feeling there's a lot of cultural language being used here. Okay, I'm not saying, I think there is a field. Okay, again, wherever it came from, however, it just wasn't mentioned before. But there's also a lot of, he doesn't come out and say, verse 5, Boaz doesn't, okay, you have to take Ruth as your wife and have children with her in the name of your dead relative. He doesn't come out and say that. The way he says it is wrapped up in the cultural understanding of how the Jews were to handle these types of situations. And so there's a lot of that language going on here in verse 5. So in verse 6, when the relative responds, I have a feeling the same thing is happening. He says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. I don't think that what he's saying is, no, I don't want Ruth as my wife because she's a Moabitess. Okay, now that could be. It could be he came up with this excuse to make that statement. In fact, there are some who think that that's exactly what this was, is once he heard about Ruth the Moabitess, no, I want nothing to do with a Gentile. And that's possible, okay? However, he says, lest I ruin my own inheritance. That would seem to suggest something going on within his own household. Okay, whatever the situation was in his own home, with his own wife, whatever the situation was, taking Ruth in and fulfilling that obligation per the law was going to be an issue with his own inheritance and his own name. And as a result, because of this, he has to pass on the whole thing. So I can't redeem it for myself. You go ahead and redeem it. Thoughts or comments through verse 6 so far? Because I think it's interesting, because it's very deliberate by Boaz, how he's going about handling this. He's very carefully dealing with this situation. You can see the deliberation and the forethought in his head, because we see in verse 7, verse 8, verse 9, he refers to the elders who were sitting there, who are listening because Boaz asked them to sit there and listen to this conversation. He says, you are witnesses this day. Okay? So Boaz has thought ahead about all of this, which means he also has thought ahead about how he's going to present the situation to his relative. My personal thought on this, even though we're not told this in the text, is I think that Boaz wants to take care of the situation, and he wants to take care of Ruth and Naomi. Okay? He can't step in himself because that is not his right under the law. So when he presents it to his blood relative, who is a closer relative to Naomi than he is, he presents it in this way to show the distinct obligations that are going to be involved here. Perhaps he even is fully aware that this close relative, once it gets to the matter of Ruth, maybe he knows full well he's not going to take Ruth as his wife. So he presents the field transaction first. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take the field. But then when he brings up Ruth, and again, it may be that because she was a Gentile, this relative wanted nothing to do with it, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say, it'll ruin my inheritance, why don't you take care of it? And so it just seems to me like when you read through and you see a lot of wisdom from Boaz, a lot of understanding of the cultural expectations as well as the lawful expectations under the law. And the way he handled it, first of all, so as to be above reproach. He handled it in such a way so that no reproach or shame should come upon Ruth or Naomi. This was done outwardly in the presence of 10 men of the elders of the city. Okay, so this was what we might say is everything's on the up and up. There is nothing inappropriate, there's nothing unlawful in any way taking place. But Boaz is very careful to distinguish not just the land obligation, but the raising of children through Ruth obligation as well. And to me, I think Boaz is very specific about that, specifically because I think he kind of knew that this blood relative wouldn't be able to do it, so that Boaz could make it clear and understood to everyone that he is lawfully taking on that role and willingly, not only of the land transaction, but also of taking Ruth as his wife. Okay, and I think this also kind of may lend itself as well to the possible age difference that exists between Boaz and Ruth. Again, we're not told of the ages of the two. Okay, if you put Ruth maybe in the 25 years old, 30 years old maybe put Boaz around 45 or 50. Even today, that's still kind of a, that's a pretty big range. Okay, but for that day and time, it may have even been a bigger deal. But Boaz wanted to make sure everything was lawful, everything was on the up and up. Thoughts through verse 5 and 6.
Do we know the marital status of Boaz at this time?
Other than Ruth? No. In fact, the only one that is ever brought up in connection to Boaz is Ruth, because it was through Ruth that David came. So I don't know that we know of any specific beyond what the situation is with Ruth. You would think it would be odd at this point, especially him being older, if he didn't have a family, but we don't read it, at least as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember reading anything about Boaz, any other family for Boaz in terms of a wife or children. Any other thoughts or comments?
It's just a shame we don't know more about the customs.
I know.
During this period of time.
Yeah. And there's different...
To know why the closer relative had to deny.
Right. And there are some commentaries that insist, they think that it's clear here in verse 6 that it's because, as soon as he brought up Ruth, who's a Moabitess, a Gentile, I can't do that. And that could be. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt. As soon as he heard about raising children for his dead relative, that may have caused something of a conflict for whatever his situation was at home. That may have been a problem. Whatever that may have been. Okay? Could the fact that she was a Gentile have had something to do with it? Yeah, it could have. But I'm hesitant to say it was a prejudice type of thing. That he didn't want anything to do with a Gentile.
Whatever surrounds inheritance is where...
Yeah, that's what he says, lest I ruin my own inheritance. So obviously the land and the raising of children in the name of his dead relative, those two are intertwined together. Okay, you can't take one and leave the other. And that's why Boaz did it the way he did it. Okay, he presented it in this format to show that these two are linked together. You can't take one and not the other. And he did it this way so that Ruth would be taken care of as well, I believe. It's his purpose in this. Yes, sir.
The only thing Boaz and this other relative are close related to.
Yeah, oh yeah, Boaz and him are close.
You kind of wonder why it doesn't apply to both of them, whatever the situation is. Maybe he's married, Boaz is not.
Yep.
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's just a big maybe.
Right.
Possibility.
And it could very well be.
It may have nothing to do with that. So
right.
That's just a possibility, not
right.
for sure. But it could be.
It could be. Or it could have at least something to do with what the situation was.
We try to make sense of things, but not knowing the customs back then.
Right.
It's just a guess.
It is.
But,
yep.
Maybe he was married, Boaz wasn't, and it was a better fit.
But you know what's interesting to me, what's amazing to me, is that despite our disconnect from the customs of this time, do we still see the character of Boaz here? Do we still see his looking out for Ruth and Naomi in this event? His wisdom, his making sure not only to take care of things regarding the law, as the law dictated, but also to make sure the custom was observed. Okay, to make sure there was no reproach, there was no question about how the situation was handled. And to me, that just speaks volumes, not only for Boaz and his character, but for us today. You know, to make sure that we do things, when we do things in society, with our coworkers or with our brethren, whatever, that we do it the right way. Okay, and that everything is done with a mind, certainly as Boaz, mind of how others might perceive it. And certainly Boaz, I think, is mindful of this, to make sure that the perception, even though there was nothing going on that was wrong, Boaz wanted to even prevent any perception of wrong. And I think that says a lot. Noah?
In spite of the things we don't know, it seems very evident there was an order by kinship, and they had a choice.
Yeah.
And so the first guy makes his choice, move to second.
Right.
So it's taken care of.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why Boaz made the point to Ruth that there is one closer to Elimelech and his son than I am in terms of blood relation. So let me handle this. Okay, you go on home, you go back to Naomi, I will take care of this. And he's doing that exact thing. He's taking care of it. Anything else?
Just one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
We see the urgency that's universal here, because even Naomi says, this is going to be resolved today.
Yeah, yeah.
So for her to say that and for Boaz to make it happen, that was part of this custom to carry on the family, to not put it off. It's
Right.
not put off or anything like that.
Well, you know, and when you read this here in verse 1, I mean, it's not like Boaz waited days or a week, or I'll get to it eventually, you know. No, it sounds like it was that morning after all this happened, this conversation with Naomi, or with Ruth. He took care of it that day. Okay, he's out there, he knows, it sounds like he knew exactly what time his blood relative would be passing through the gate. He takes 10 of these elders, men of the city. And then in verse 7, and it's interesting to me that the writer of Ruth even goes so far as to describe that some customs have apparently changed even in the time of Ruth to the time of the writing of Ruth. Because in verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. So apparently by the time of the writing of Ruth, this was not the custom any longer, but in former times, this is how it worked. Okay, and in the concerning redeeming and exchanging, whether it specifically had to do with just raising up children in a dead relative's name, or it also included any other type of transaction, which I think that's kind of what's being implied here, one would take his sandal off and give it to another. And it would show possession. I have given my possession, or my right to the possession, as is the case here, to this individual. And so in verse 8, therefore the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal, and Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's, from the hand of Naomi. So Chilion and Mahlon are the names of whom? Of who? Yeah, apparently they are Elimelech's sons, those two sons who also died, Naomi's sons. So one of those would have been Ruth's husband, from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, verse 10, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. So it's interesting to me that Boaz says, okay, so everybody's a witness that I have purchased everything that belonged to Elimelech. Okay, this field would be a part of that, but Also, moreover, notice these are two distinct things. I'm also taking Ruth as my wife to perpetuate children in the name of Malon or Malon, or however you want to pronounce that. Malon sounds like a Star Trek name for some reason, but Malon. He says to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. And so he's very clear about what he's doing and why. And he's making it very cut and dry. Okay, he doesn't want there to be any misunderstandings or anybody not aware of exactly what his intentions are. It's very clear. For all intents and purposes, it's basically like a spoken contract. Okay, basically it's an oral contract that is being proclaimed and recognized in the presence of these 10 elders of the city and whoever other people there that are hearing this as well. And so it's done. I mean, that's the transaction. That's it. Any thoughts through verse 10?
What? I guess I missed it. Why do we think he's maybe as old as he is?
Because Boaz, I think there was a reference from Naomi earlier about Boaz being of Elimelech's blood or whatnot, but it's implied that he's older. It may not be. I mean, it's possible that he's not. But the fact that he, first of all, he's apparently very wealthy. He has his own threshing floor, his own field, his own servants, all of that. I mean, he could possess all of that as a young man. But he even says himself to Naomi back in chapter 3, was it that he specifically said something about her not going after the, verse 10, yeah, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, and that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. Now, he's not calling himself old, but he apparently doesn't consider himself a young man. So I would suggest that he is older for sure than her. That would seem to be that implication. How much older, we don't know. But it just kind of appears, especially the way Boaz handles this, it would seem as though, especially how he handled Ruth in chapter 3 and this situation in chapter 4, it would seem like he's being very careful to make sure everything is done appropriately, perhaps because of the age difference between the two of them. That might very well be part of the reason why he's being very careful in how he handles this.
That's speculation.
But it's speculation. No, I grant you, that is speculation. I agree.
He does refer to her as my daughter.
He does.
So
that could be kind of
it would be kind of weird to say something same age,
That's true.
Joe was to call me his daughter.
But he's had a position of authority.
But he had a position of authority, so you could look at it that way too. Yeah. I mean, it's
same thing too.
Yeah. No, I agree. There's nothing specifically that says that he's old or elderly. I'd say. I would think that chapter 3 would suggest that he is older than she is.
Very wise in how he handled it.
He is very wise. He is very wise in how he handled it. And if he is of the younger side of things, he's wise beyond his years in handling it the way he does. Nolan?
Do we presume the other daughter-in-law not coming back, did she give up her rights? Or if she came back, would Boaz owe her the same as to Ruth?
I would imagine...
would have gone through both sons.
Right. I would imagine because the name Elimelech would now go through Malon, through Boaz. Okay, so Elimelech's name is taken care of. Obviously, was it Chilion's name? That would be, what was the girl's name who went back to her family? Who was, Orpah, that's right, Orpah. So Chilion's name apparently won't be perpetuated. But yeah, if she were to come back, but I wonder though, under the way this thing worked, if she went ahead and went home, if that was her then clearing her name of being Chilion's wife, for all intents and purposes. She went home, now she's free to marry whoever else from Moab she wants to. She went back to her father's house, but the fact that Ruth stuck with Naomi, it's as if she's still sticking to Malon's name. And all the things that go with that, the culture, the law, everything. And that's what Ruth herself said back in chapter 1, that she was willing to take that on. So I would think, I'm not an expert in this culture here, but I would think that she would have yielded that right at that point when she went home. I would think. Now, whether the Jews and the Moabites had an understanding as to how that would work, I don't know. If all of a sudden she showed up and said, hey, I'd like, to be somebody's wife to perpetuate Chilian's name, would the Jews take that seriously? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know how that would work. Ben?
It seems to me part of Boaz's goal is back to Naomi too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
First given the grain, so he knew it was getting back to Naomi.
Right.
And
Well, and it's not to say that whoever this close relative is, I mean, you read some of the commentaries about this, and some of them suggest this close relative was a bad person. I don't think that's fair to make that judgment just based on the fact he's not even given a name. We're not even told his name. It just says a close relative. Okay, we don't know what his background is, what the situation is. I think it would be fair to say that Boaz is more invested in seeing care given to Ruth and Naomi, and that he would prefer to be the one providing that care. Okay, I think Boaz is invested in them. He cares about their well-being. He wants them to be taken care of. That's not necessarily an indictment of this close relative to say that he wouldn't take care of Ruth and Naomi, but Boaz being invested the way he is, he wants to take care of it. Okay, now he's not tricking the close relative or anything like that. He's not deceiving him or anything like that. But I think Boaz is very specific here for this reason, so that it gives the best opportunity for him to be able to take care of Ruth and Naomi. Ellen?
I need to backtrack an earlier comment I made. I said they each had a choice. Evidently this other relative, although he was closer by kin, he says twice, I cannot.
Yeah.
That's not-
Yeah, he says I cannot, not I don't want to. You're right.
Something, again, we don't know, something prevented him.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
conflicting law or
Yeah, twice in verse 6 he says, I cannot redeem it for myself lest I ruin my own inheritance. Then at the end of verse 6, I cannot redeem it. So yeah, it's not that he says, I'd rather not, I don't really want to. It's that I cannot. So there may have been some kind of a law issue there involved somewhere mixed in there that wasn't an issue as well. Ben?
I think that it's as simple as being able to afford it. Boaz is rich or wealthy.
It could be.
And he doesn't want to squander what he's saved up for his inheritance to buy this land.
Yeah.
Redeem it.
Yeah.
I mean, could it be that simple?
It could be. I mean, like we said, we don't read of any family of Boaz, even in chapter 3, when he's, lying at the threshing floor after he had his dinner. We don't read of his wife being in there or kids or anything else. It's just him and Ruth. So it might very well, be part of that he's got the means to take care of both Ruth and Naomi and any children that might come along or that will come along. Whereas this individual may already have a full family and may not be able to take care of them. So it could be. It could be. Yeah. All right, anything else through that? Doug, did I see your hand a second ago?
Yeah, that's a second.
Okay, that was a second ago. All right. If you remember, let me know. So you are witnesses this day. Verse 11. And all the people who were at the gate, the elders, said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. May you prosper in Ephrathah. Ephrathah is fun to say. We'll say Ephrathah. And be famous in Bethlehem. I think this is kind of an interesting statement. I'm assuming that they're not all chanting this, unless it's like one of those cultural things where everybody says, this is what you say. I'm guessing it's one of the elders is speaking on behalf of the witnesses who were there and the people of the city. This is what they said. We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who's coming to your house like Rachel and Leah. In what way? How is this? Because ultimately this is a blessing. Okay, they're offering this blessing. How is this a blessing?
you have many offspring.
Have many offspring. Okay, between Rachel and Leah there was many offspring. The two who built the house of Israel, may you prosper in, how did I pronounce it? Ephrathah. I'm going with Ephrathah. And be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. And again, they specifically bring out young woman as if that's in comparison to Boaz. Again, that's kind of the feel that you get from that. Again, it's not specifically stated, but it would seem to be that there may be some kind of a thought there. It also does seem to suggest, perhaps, again, they may just be speaking on behalf of the seed of Elimelech, okay? But it may be also suggestive of the fact that Boaz doesn't have a family of his own. And so they're blessing this union, even though he's doing this in fulfillment of the law, to fulfill the responsibility under the law. It's also a blessing to him as well, okay, to that end. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Okay, so there's it seems like there is some recognizing that this is a important occasion. Okay, this is an important occasion. This is an important event to acknowledge, and it's worth a blessing to, and basically a word of congratulations to Boaz. And that's kind of how this reads, although obviously it's more the focus is on having children and having a house established through children. But it's basically congratulations. We're happy for you. May you have many kids. Pam? Say that again? You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, she does have a good reputation. In fact, Boaz, I think, refers to her reputation as being virtuous. Virtuous. So, you're absolutely right. Anything else through verse 12? All right, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. The women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative. May his name be famous in Israel. May he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." So, verse 14 and 15. So we see verse 13 that there is a child born. It's a son. Verse 14 and 15, I think it's interesting that it comes back to Naomi here. That all the women, of course, remember how Naomi entered when she came back. What was she telling everybody to call her? Bitter. Okay, Mara, bitter. Okay, because she had no one left to take care of her. All right, well now, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative. May his name be famous in Israel. And of course, is his name going to be famous in Israel? Yes, it is. Not the least of which is because David's going to come from this, but also ultimately because Jesus will. And in verse 15, may he be to you a restorer of life. Remember, it's the way Naomi was before. She felt like her life had been taken away, in her son's and her husband's life being taken away. And a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, and that's obvious, right, by her conduct, who is better to you than 7 sons. Why 7? Why 7 sons? Why not better to you than 3 sons?
Perfect.
It's 7. It's the idea of completion. Okay, no matter how many sons you had, you could have a complete number of sons, she'd still be better for you than 7 sons. Okay, which speaks to what about Naomi, or about Ruth?
She's okay.
She's all right. Yeah, she's decent stock, right? No, it's not just that she loves her, but that this woman is extremely active. Okay, she is extremely good to Naomi. She is constantly, we see she's constantly working. She's very virtuous. You think about the virtuous woman that is mentioned by Solomon, and how, you look at Solomon's definition of virtuous woman. Would Ruth fit that definition in character? Yeah, it would, absolutely. Ruth was constantly, she was asking to work. Okay, that's for us, that's unbelievable in our society. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And we noticed how often both Boaz and Naomi mention Jehovah in their dialogue, in their language. Okay, just Boaz almost kind of as a part of his daily language would mention Jehovah. And to me, there's a great lesson there, even though this lesson's not on Boaz specifically, but what a great reminder for us that through the course of our day to think about Jehovah, to mention him in the things we say, or to bring up biblical concepts, or to quote a scripture or whatever, just in the course of our day, even if it's to ourselves, just to remind ourselves about Jehovah being an everyday part of our life. I mean, this is why God instructed Moses to instruct the children of Israel to write it on your doorposts. Okay, when you rise up and when you lie down, you speak of God's commandments, you speak of God's precepts, because then when you're surrounded by it and you're constantly reminded of it, what are you more likely to do? Follow. You're more likely to follow it and to remember Jehovah. So in verse 16, Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi," and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So it's interesting, Naomi is able to be a nursemaid to Obed, okay? And I think that just kind of shows the pair bond. I mean, not that Ruth isn't pair bond, to her son also, but this beautiful relationship that is now blossoming between Naomi and her grandson because of the great love that Ruth had for her. And I just think that's, it's the beautiful conclusion to this account. And then in verse 18, this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Abinadab. Abinadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. And that's the end of Ruth. Thoughts or comments through that? Yes, sir.
And going back into selling the land, he says, Naomi's the one who's selling this parcel of land belonging to Elimelech, and yet, why didn't she need to be redeemed? Because she'd already had sons, even though they're dead? It's going to carry on just to another generation?
Yeah.
You think, why didn't Naomi herself, Boaz, marry her?
My again, this is kind of the suggestion here, is that Naomi may have been of age she couldn't bear children anymore. And because she could not bear children, she had already borne sons, and then they died. In order for that lineage to carry on, it had to come through her daughter-in-law, even though it wasn't technically by blood. It was still Naomi being of the age that she was, and also the fact that the lineage had already carried on. Maybe it couldn't back up a step, and now let me start over here. Maybe that was also part of it. But the straightforward thought is that Naomi couldn't. And that since her daughter-in-law was available to be able to do that, then that was the route to take. It's a thought. All right. Okay, that's the end of Ruth. We will quickly finish up the questions next week, and we will begin our study of Gamaliel, Nicodemus, and Joseph of Arimathea. Thank you, everybody.